I'm a cyber behavior researcher, and a part of my work is to investigate how people interact within cyber environment and how the cyber environment impacts them. Over the last couple of years, I run research on Generation Z, the first so-called digital natives. Now, the term digital native gets very often confused, so before we go any further, and just to make sure we are all on the same page, we're going to do this popular hands up exercise. Could please all of you who are 22 years old and younger raise the hands? Okay, 22 years old and younger. You belong to Generation Z, and you are very likely to be digital natives. Doesn't necessarily mean you are, but you're very likely to be, and I'll explain you later why. Now, could those who are 23 years old and older raise their hands? Okay. So we are a generation of millennials, Generation X or baby boomers, and we're never going to be digital natives. Doesn't matter what we do. We are so-called digital immigrants. Now, when I call people digital immigrants, they get sometimes confused, sometimes even offended, and they tell me, well, wait a minute. If I look at myself and my digital skills, I'm much better in coding, Excel sheets, PowerPoint presentations than any of your so-called digital natives. So how do I get to be called the immigrant? And that's the first thing we need to realize. Digital nativeness has nothing to do with digital skills. Those are digital literacy. So meanwhile, the digital literacy is about mastering the digital skills and can be learned at any point in our life. Digital nativeness is a condition we are born into and we are grow into. So when we talk about digital natives, it doesn't mean that if you're a digital native, you're necessarily going to be good in Photoshop, the same way as the fact that you're digital illiterate with some great digital skills going to make you a digital native. To be a digital native means that you are growing up interacting with cyber environment. So the same way I'm born in a certain country or culture, and I'm growing up in this culture, and I learn its language, and I become native, let's say, in Swedish or Chinese, the same way digital natives are born into the cyber technology age, and they are using it to nurture them, they're using it as a game, they're using it as their pacifier, and the cyber environment represents the new world which shapes them. So meanwhile, as digital immigrants, we got hit by technology, and it either significantly improved or messed up our life. It happened when our brain were already fully developed, and they were ready to face this hyper-arousal nature of the cyber environment. Digital natives, on the contrary, they are growing up, and their brain, this fragile developing brain, is exposed to a wide range of stimuli sourcing from this cyber technology, which brings some pros and some cons, but above all, which makes them different to us, digital immigrants. So all the time I talk about the digital immigrants and digital natives, I get sometimes confused, and people ask me very many questions. And at this point, we start to talk about what makes them different, what makes them tick different, and so on. And at this point, I would like to talk about the fact how the whole technology affects the way they are. I would start with the fact that cyber technology is something which always raises a question. When we deal with digital nativeness, the cyber technology is the determinant number one. And if we talk about a cyber technology, it gets often very interesting because some people love it and some people hate it. And it's kind of normal because if you look at history of our society, we have always this quite interesting relationship with everything new, every new technology that came. We can go all the way to ancient Greece when Socrates claims about writing that it's going to make us forget things and it's going to enable us to gain a knowledge without directly experiencing something. Hence, it's going to make us feel that we are very educated, despite the fact we will remain ignorant. And as a result, the whole technology of writing will be a burden for society. So Socrates was certainly right. The writing makes us remember less. But at the same time, it was completely incorrect to assume that the writing was a burden for our society. I think we can all agree it was quite the opposite. So the whole story went on and on about the radio and the TV, even the innocent PowerPoint presentations replacing the boards in a school. So we can argue that every technology, or every new technology, brings a wave of question marks and fears, and we somehow find a way how to work around it. And the cyber technology can be just the same. But I dare to say that cyber technology is it's different and much more delicate matter. I like to compare it to fire. When we invented fire, or better say, when we gained control over the fire, it transformed us as humans. The fact that we can suddenly cook the meat and have a higher calorie intake and digest better the protein helped our brain to develop and help us to develop as a species. We could suddenly use the fire as a source of light, and we could wake up earlier and go to sleep later, and even if it was dark. We could use the fire to heat our shelters and live in areas which were previously too cold and inhabitable. So fire, if used correctly, it makes our life better, and it pushes forward. But all of us know that if we play with the fire, and if we use it in a clumsy way, it can burn our fingers, it can burn our eyebrows. Happened to me when I was little. As a matter of fact, it can burn the entire building or the entire town. Technology is just the same. It's incredibly powerful, and it can help us grow. But at the same time, if we use it in an incorrect way, it can hurt us, and it can burn us. Now, there is one main difference between the cyber technology and the fire. The most significant one. If I play with the fire, if I use it in a clumsy way, I burn my fingers, and I can learn from my negative experience immediately and adjust my behavior. With the cyber technology, it takes time to observe its negative impacts. So the same way as a frog in slowly heated water doesn't realize it's getting cooked, the same way many of us are using cyber technology in a way that hurts us without realizing it before it's too late. Now, all the time we talk about negative effects of technology, people tell me, well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Now I just feel like smashing my phone against the wall and running away. But the fact is, we can't run away from technology. And honestly, even if we could, it would be just insanely stupid to do so, because technology makes our lives better. We can start from the fact, beside the fact that we have the all constant instant access to information, we can start with the fact that it serves as our cognitive prosthetics, as an extension of our mind. So let's say I'm very bad in orientation and reading maps. And in past, I get lost very often. Now I can get from point A to point B with ease because the Google Maps show me the way. Cyber technology serves as our social prosthetics and help us to nourish and develop relationships. My grandma, she's very dear to me, and she's also my best friend. But she lives in another country. So when I was growing up, our sort of contact was restricted to brief phone calls and paper letters. Now I can call her every day and tell her how much I love her. So there are many other things, like learning the languages was never so easier. Imagine people who are completely paralyzed can now write emails just using their minds. They have sort of brain-computer interfaces which are reading their brainwaves and translating them into the commands for the machines. And all of us, as we already heard, we can use biometrics to measure quality of our sleep, the calorie intake, the heart rate, and so on. So this is few of many positive impacts of technology, and a few of many ways how we can use it for good. And by using it for good, we should still be aware of its hyper-arousal nature, which can somehow overcome and overpass the capacity of our brain, our cognitive skills, our regulation skills, and can lead to many maladaptive schemas of the brain. So now we're going to talk about the negative impacts of the cyber technology, but don't worry, this is not going to develop into one of those talks you heard already a zillion times about how the technology makes us connected but alone, and how the fact that we are moving more and more from real life into virtual environment it's bad, and how the fact that the social media connections are not our real friends but our audience is sad. All of those are valid points, but I don't think they must be universally good or bad. As a matter of fact, some people don't need friends and they do search for audience. Years ago, in this pre-social media time, we would go out with friends, and there would be this one girl, and she would be talking like 90% of the time. And the rest of us would be just sitting there and listening to her and waiting for those 10%, this remaining 10% to say something, which sometimes never came. Now, guess what? When we go out today, my talkative friend, she's still there. But she's talking much less because part of her time is occupied by taking pictures of herself and her environment so she can post it online. She even has one of those apps when she can retouch herself, like slim herself down and smoothen her skin, whiten her teeth. She can even whiten the white of her eyes. It's pretty impressive. So meanwhile, she's outsourcing her high need for attention to the cyber audience. The rest of us, we can actually have a decent conversation, meanwhile still enjoying her company, partially. So I think it's sort of natural selection, and I kind of like it. One thing I was just asking myself is what would happen if this girl, this friend of mine, would meet a guy online, and this guy will fall in love with her. And it would be not really with her, it would be in this highly curated, retouched virtual form of her. And let's say it's working out, and the guy asks her out for a coffee. Well, that might be quite challenging, because if they meet in physical life, however nice girl she is, her waist is not so slim, and her skin is not so soft. So the guy might be actually very disappointed by her, by the real her. But who knows, maybe they can just keep it in virtual and live happily ever after online. As a matter of fact, there is a study from Professor Zach. It's a study about oxytocin, which is a hormone we use it's a bonding hormone. So we produce it, for instance, when we make love. Now, Professor Zach, he proves that this oxytocin can be also produced when interacting in virtual environment. And as a matter of fact, he claims and he proves that some people interacting in virtual environment can produce more oxytocin than people interacting in real life. The most disturbing case was the one of the groom just about to get married. So I wouldn't like to be bride on that wedding. Then we can revisit, this hypothetical boyfriend of my friend. And we can maybe realize that maybe he is socially anxious, and maybe in real physical life he would never fit in any social circle. And being in a virtual, and being in love in virtual and online, it's his only way how to feel loved. So, yes, technology is changing the way we are and we interact. And it's changing it in a very dramatic and sometimes even awkward way. But I think it's not fair to classify it as bad just because it's so different. Now, what we can clearly classify as bad is the way we use the technology and the cyber technology in a way that hurts our biology. Over the last couple of years, I invited more than 4,500 digital natives into the research, and I questioned them about their digital habits. I also talked to their parents and their teachers, and I even plugged some of those students in an encephalogram machine and see what was going on in their brain. And the amount of malpractice was astonishing. It seems like no one is really knowing what they are doing. It seems like we are just sleepwalking our way into the cyber reality and cyber technology. So we can start with many different negative impacts of malpractice. I'll just pick up some of those, starting with the very simplest one, our device. So all of us knows that our phones radiate, right? As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization placed it in a B group carcinogens already in 2011. Now, just a quick question, how many of you sleep with your phones? Hands up. I certainly sometimes do too. Now, 97% of digital natives sleep with their phones. That means, meanwhile they're supposed to be getting restorative sleep, their brain is getting full doses of B group carcinogen radiation. Now, talking about restorative sleep, all of us also know, it's quite known that the LED lights, the blue light from our devices, is breaking the production of melatonin, which is a hormone imperative for our good sleep architecture. I'm not going to ask you how many of you look at your phones before falling asleep, but 92% of digital natives are falling asleep looking at their phones. That means that the last thing they look on before they close their eyes are the digital devices. There is now a first clinic in the US specializing in a new medical condition called phone neck. So that's a condition digital natives suffer from because of their body posture when they interact with their phones. And then another thing is digital natives are growing up and their sensitive eyes are looking on the devices just a couple of centimeters in front of them instead of looking in a 3D world and in a distance. And as a result, they develop myopia, which is a fancy word for short-sightedness. Now, those were just effects of the devices on our body. Now we're going to talk about the effect of cyber environment on our brain. And when we talk about the brain, I need to first introduce you to someone. So please meet brain cell. We have 84 billions and more of it. Can you imagine someone, actually, some neuroscientists counting them, like 83 billions 1 and 83 billions 2, 83 billions 3, and then they make a mistake, so they need to start all over again. So if I want to explain our brain in a very simple way, there is a white matter and there is a gray matter. Gray matter is the one conveniently being in gray color on this image. It doesn't really look like this in real life. And that's the brain nucleus. And the white matter is the axon which is transferring the signal from the nucleus into another cell. And this white part, this white color is caused by myelin lipid, which makes the whole connection and transmission much quicker. So what we can say in very, very simple way is that the gray matter is the volume of the brain, and the white matter is sort of speed and connectivity of our brain. Now, wide range of research papers all around the world proves that compulsive cyber technology usage, such as compulsive gaming and internet addiction, decrease the white matter and gray matter integrity of our brain. That means that people who are practicing this cyber technology malpractice are this way making their brain smaller and slower. Now, we're going to talk about the next thing, which is so-called neuroplasticity. It's very simple. Our brain is like a muscle. If you use it, if you exercise certain parts, those parts responsible for this task get stronger. If you don't exercise certain skills, those parts atrophy. Now, it's wonderfully dynamic sort of feature of our brain. The only problem is that our brain just cuts away everything we don't use. And unfortunately, it does not have faculty to see which skills are important and which not. So it's all about frequency. And that can cause a problem. For instance, the hippocampus. Hippocampus is part of the brain responsible for remembering, for storing the long-term memories. Now, digital natives are growing up, and they don't need to remember anymore because they just outsource everything to Google. They can Google every piece of information. So as a result, they don't practice the hippocampus, and as a result, the hippocampus doesn't really develop that much. And we can say, well, and what? You know, the fact that we don't need to use the memory, we don't really need a hippocampus anymore. But the fact is, hippocampus plays also an important role in emotional regulation, spatial orientation. Hippocampus plays an important part in anxiety and hyperactivity issues. And hippocampus is the first part of the brain which gets affected in Alzheimer's disease. And then there is the last thing we're going to talk about, that's dopamine. So I'm sure everyone already heard about dopamine. It's sort of celebrity of the brain hormones. It's very important in our body. It serves as a reward. And if you wouldn't have a dopamine, or if you wouldn't produce a dopamine, we wouldn't be eating and we will die of starvation. We wouldn't have sex. So this reward hormone is produced by our body to reward us for practicing activities which are important for our survival. Now, in the past, we have to deserve the boost of dopamine. But right now, so if you wanted to get something, if you wanted to get the boost of dopamine, we had to perform certain tasks. Right now, the cyber technology is so hyper-arousing and so rewarding that it's sort of maintain a constant release of dopamine in our brain. So as a result, we have a new generation of cyber pleasure seekers who are developing all kinds of cyber addictions. So as a result, right now, we have a new generation of digital natives with a lower attention span, with a poor memory retention, with hyperactivity syndrome, with high anxiety, and so on. So now looking at all the impacts, negative impacts of the cyber technology, can we finally say it's bad? My response will be still no. I have a car, and I use it a lot. If I should walk to the supermarket for 18 minutes, I prefer just to take a ride, because it's more comfortable and it's more convenient. Now, the fact that I don't walk is actually very bad for my health. So am I going to say my car is bad and just stop using it? No. Instead, I go to gym twice a week to compensate for that. So the same way we are compensating for the excessive usage of car, the same way we should have this small brain gym agenda on our mind and practice certain skills every day. This way we make sure that those skills which technology takes away from us and which might be vital for our survival and well-being are still kept. So soft skills as a memory retention, attention, emotional intelligence, virtual hygiene should be part of our daily practice. The same way we are learning new language and practicing it every day, the same way we go for a run, the same way we should practice those skills. And this way we can use technology, benefiting from the goods and eliminating the negative impacts. So technology is good, and cyber technology is good. But the way we use it is really bad. And my hope is that the same way as we learn how to master fire to get the benefits and avoid the negatives, the same way we'll learn how to live with technology to make us grow, but avoid this technology to hurt our biology. Thank you.